Hello Deep Value community, thank you for joining me. In today's video, I want to talk about 5 key ratios that are helpful for you as an investor. So if you're new to the channel, please subscribe now. So I'm going to take these ratios in order from the ones that I least like to the one that I most use. So the first ratio that's relevant to you as an investor is a price to earnings ratio. Now each ratio has advantages and disadvantages, okay? So the price to earnings ratio has a problem. The problem is that earnings are to a large extent down to an estimate of what the company believes its assets are worth and how much they're depreciating. So it's really just a dirty metric. Specifically, the price to EPS, price to earnings per share, man, that ratio, like, you can make up whatever that number wants to be. You have different associations going in with it. You got, for example, how much should I depreciate this intangible? You have how many shares did I dilute out on this period? Did I dilute towards the back end of the period so that kind of it weights it out differently? It's a dirty metric. But that is a metric that many institutions talk about and say, oh, the company only trades at 40 times earnings. I mean, it means absolutely nothing, but that's the one that people most use. We're going to talk about EBITDA, and EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. It's a mouthful, it sounds awful, but it's an industry standard. Now, EBITDA, if you watch Charlie Munger, you know what it stands for. It stands for BS earnings. And the investor that pioneered this type of thinking was John Malone. I'm a huge fan of John Malone, many value investors are, and the idea is that this is the raw amount of cash the business could generate. Now, why did John Malone start with this EBITDA? I don't want to make the video too complicated, but the idea is that when John Malone has his business, his empire, they're predominantly telecommunication companies. Now, John Malone's often called the cable cowboy. He used to, and still does when he's active, leverages up the business. Now the business, a telecommunications company, like a broadband provider, has very recurring revenue stream. It's quite predictable, it's very stable, particularly in the back end of the 80s into the 90s. That business was just booming. You could leverage it up to about 5 times, and leverage up means add debt to it, and you could just run that EBITDA, just grow it out. Now, that has a problem because a lot of people abuse that metric, but it's a slightly better comparable metric than a price to earnings. The next one that I find quite useful is price to sales. Now, price to sales is like everything else, has advantages and disadvantages. The first problem with price to sales is that it doesn't tell you jack about the business's debt. Now, a business that has a lot of debt has a lot of interest. So you have a lot of interest, typically the earnings per share would compress down, and with the price of sales, you don't get that feel for it. So you can look at a company and has a very low price of sales, for example, a retailer, but that's simply because its operating earnings are very, very slim. You look at, for example, Amazon, I haven't checked, but Amazon's price of sales probably is around about 3.84 times. So it has a very, very low price to sales ratio. It doesn't tell you that it's necessarily undervalued because of that. What you should do is you compare the price of sales of, let's say, Amazon, how it is today, to, for example, how it was over the last 3 and 5 year periods. So that gives you a good measure. If you see that today's price of sales is quite small relative to how it was trading 5 years ago, that could imply that sentiment has come away from the stock. It could mean that the company is slightly undervalued relative to its historical past. Now, everything takes a bit of nuance. It might be undervalued, or it might be actually that it's overvalued because investors think that the business is running out of steam. So every single metric, you need to compare it back to how it was 5 years ago, because that tells you the most comparable thing to compare a company is against itself historically. Of course, you also want to compare with its peers. The next one that I find quite useful is price to cash flow. So we're getting slightly more into my camp. price to cash flow is nice. It's actual amount of cash the business brings in. When I invest in a business, I think about the business's potential to grow intrinsic value over time. The best way to get that is to see how much raw cash that business is bringing in. Now, it has two problems. The first problem is that companies use a lot of stock-based compensation. This gets added back on the price to cash flow. So price to cash flow from operations, the best way to do this, you go into sec.gov and you look up the company. You look up the 10K file. I've got a few videos on that already on the channel. So you look up the price to cash flow from operations. So you're just trying to do that metric again. You're trying to compare what is the price to cash flow today relative to what it was 3-5 years ago. Okay? Now, the second problem about that one is it doesn't tell you anything about the business's ability to invest back into itself. And what I mean by that is that it doesn't tell you anything about the business doing capital expenditure. A business needs to invest back into itself to grow revenues. That's how a business should work, and that's how the business should be operating. The business may cut back on capex, but you need to be aware that the price to cash flow has those two problems. It doesn't include stock-based compensation. You can just literally subtract or net out that stock-based compensation from a price to cash flow to tell you a more approximate earning power of that company. Now we're getting closer to the one that I really like. I like price to free cash flow. This is the one that I use the most, the one I think about the most, the one that I recommend that you think about the most. This needs to be in everything that you think about the business, okay? So it's the price to cash flow from operations minus capital expenditure. Now, many people say, oh, capital expenditure, that's growth capex. Now, let me tell you, forget about that. The business needs to invest for growth, okay? Do not think about, that a portion of that capex might mean that it's investing for growth, it's growth capex. Don't think like that. That's going to get you in the wrong place, because the business needs to keep investing into itself to grow out. That's how you get the business to grow intrinsic value. If the business is cutting back on its capex, now the first problem you're going to have is that in a few years the revenue is going to come down. So what about certain businesses, Michael, that are quite cyclical? For example, I don't know, let's say, just for the sake of conversation, a hotel chain. So it doesn't need every single year to have that massive capex. It might have some years that has no capex. So you think, oh wow, this business is real cash cow. So you got to wait. The way to think about it is look over the last 3-5 years. Just normalize, just average out the last 3 or 5 years and try to get a more of a nuanced interpretation of what the capex is over a course of a business cycle. Just before we wrap up, I want to give you a quick example. Say Alphabet, okay? Alphabet is a company that I have no position in, but I'm quite bullish the company. Now, Alphabet in 2017, 2018, 2019, the economy was expanding rapidly, so advertising was very strong. So the amount of free cash flow it was making was quite elevated. Now we're filming this in 2020, and the global economy is contracting rapidly. Now you got to think, okay, it's possible that advertising might not be as strong this year relative to what it was in 2019. So it's possible that that free cash flow, looking back historically, is actually quite high, and it looks like it's a bargain price today. So I just wanted to touch on one more thing. A lot of investors like to look at forward estimates. Please disregard that. A forward estimate is a myth. You have absolutely no idea what's going to happen in the future. You have no idea. The way to think about it, try as much as possible to look in the rear view mirror. Try and look what the company has actually done. That's a fact. Nobody can take that from you. So that's the business has done in the past. You can run an assumption, but it's just an assumption. Do not use anyone else's assumptions of what it's going to be in the future. Say, in the future, I look up on Yahoo Finance or something similar, and this company is only trading, let's say, I don't know, like 10 times forward price to free cash flow. Please, don't do that. Use your own assumption. Do your own hard work. So as always, hope you found this video useful. Please subscribe. See you next time.